Colorado.
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 No, not Rado.
Colorado, Rocky Mountain High.
No,
He doesn't sing it Colorado.
Yes.
Should we start?
Yeah.
Bum, bum, bum. Hi, this is Brecken.
And Jonathan.
From Gem Junkies. And this is episode
4.
4. I had to count in my head because it wasn't 1 or 2.
Yeah, so episode 4. And last week we had a great episode on
Opal.
Australian opal. And we did get a few questions and comments. And one of the interesting questions was, so tell us, how hard are teeth? Teeth are a 5 on the Mohs scale. So
which I find really interesting because that crazy miner that had opal dentures was actually doing better than the rest of us because his opals were harder than our teeth.
Yeah, yeah. So that was kind of an interesting factoid that teeth are only a 5.
I was surprised.
So we should.
But you said teeth are harder than steel as well.
Yeah. So steel isn't that hard. It's.
I guess it can bend pretty easy.
Yeah, you can bend it and scratch it and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Moving on to Ruby.
Yes. Today's topic. Ruby, the king of all gemstones.
That's what its name means in Sanskrit.
Really?
Ratnaraj means king of gems.
Wow, that's cool.
But it gets its ruby name from Latin.
Okay.
Which is ruber, I think, which means red.
Yeah, I don't speak Latin, so.
I don't either. I didn't take it. My dad wanted me to be a doctor. I said no.
The interesting thing about ruby is that I think a lot of people don't realize that ruby and sapphire are essentially the same gemstone. They're both part of the Corundum family.
Yeah, when I learned this, when I first came into the gem world, it was like mind blown. I remember sitting there thinking, what?
Yeah.
What?
So
they're
sapphire,
the same thing.
Sapphire comes in every color of the rainbow. When it's red, it's a ruby.
Yeah, mind blown. Still, to this day, it gives me like little goosebumps. Like, what?
And then we in America have pink sapphire. The rest of the world really calls anything that's pink, even in the pink, is considered a ruby in the rest of the world. And it wasn't until more recently that there even was any distinction between pink sapphire and ruby. And still, when you talk about like star rubies, which it's where, a cabochon shows chatoyancy, you get the pink ones are still considered
right, but
ruby.
GIA here in America bases are the range for ruby is an orangey red to purpley red.
Right.
So no pink in America.
No pink in America. It's pink sapphire. We like it.
But ruby is the color red. So the thing that I found really interesting was anything red back in medieval time, before we had like gemology, was a ruby.
Right, and it wasn't until the late 1800s that they even started like studying gemology, and it wasn't until the early 1900s that we even had like gemological labs, and it wasn't until like the 1920s that they even had, with the founding of the Gemological Institute of America and all that kind of stuff, that you actually had that jewelers even had a place to actually send in to have testing done to know the difference between the different gemstones.
Right. So a lot of your crown jewels, probably the most famous one, the Black Prince ruby, is actually a spinel.
Yeah, a red spinel. And that's one of the interesting things is spinels tend to come in much larger crystal sizes than ruby does. And so a lot of your very, very giant so-called rubies were actually spinel.
Yep. And rubies were highly prized and desired throughout medieval and ancient times. They signified wealth, power, nobility. Think of a ruby like it's a power stone, right?
Yeah,
That's
it's a power stone. And the other great thing is that it makes ruby and sapphire and corundum as a whole a power stone is the fact that you can wear it every day.
Well, right, that's the hardness, but I'm talking about the color. So you think about the color of red, it's passion, fury, anger, desire. That's all you think of.
All your strongest emotions all wrapped up into...
So we like to say not everyone can wear a ruby.
No.
It's kind of a self-purchase, I think, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of... No, anniversary. I think some people do anniversary gifts for...
So we talked about kind of ruby history and ruby lore. Should we talk about how rubies are formed?
Yeah.
Do you know what process forms rubies?
What process forms
It's a metamorphic process. So the way I like to think about it is a lot of your rubies, your most prized rubies, are found in Myanmar, which is Burma, which is by the Himalayas, right?
Yeah.
And so you think of all the pressure that's caused or created where you push the plates together, and that's where your ruby is found. Along those plates, it's due to the heat and pressure from mountain formation.
Cool.
Yeah, so in Burma, do you know what kind of deposits they're found in?
What kind of deposits?
Marble deposits.
Right.
Why are marble deposits cool, John?
Because marble is white and ruby is red. It has a great color distinction.
It is, but it also is really low in iron.
Okay, so it makes really bright,
really
bright rubies.
So chromium, which colors ruby, fluoresces red. And when you have iron in the stone, it kind of blocks the fluorescence.
Right.
So when you go out into the sun, the ruby really screams, or you put it under UV light, it really glows a bright red.
Yeah. Now, what happens with rubies from, like, Cambodia or Thailand? Is that also metamorphic?
No, so those are, well, yes, they are metamorphic, but they're found in a different type of deposit. It's a basalt rock instead of a marble.
Oh, okay.
And there's more iron in basalt.
Okay.
Which blocks the fluorescence.
So you have kind of darker, sleepier rubies from
East Africa and from Thailand,
Cambodia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What about from, like, Greenland?
Yeah, Greenland, I'm not quite sure because that's still a really new deposit.
I think those are more bright. And same with, like, Vietnam had those.
Yeah, but Vietnam has those because they're close to the Himalayas and they have the marble deposit. Okay. So Vietnam has really bright, Burma has really bright. I'm not sure so much because there's also material coming out of Afghanistan and Pakistan right now as well. Yeah. But the cool thing I like to think about in ruby formation is think about Pangea, like 300 million years ago.
Yeah, when all the world was kind of like one supercontinent.
And you can draw a line right down Pangea, and that's where all your rubies found. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, we'll have to put up on the on our blog, kind of put up a Pangea with a line with where all the deposits are found.
Yeah. So if you keep following the line, it ends in Antarctica.
So there could be rubies in Antarctica.
Yeah, so there is a theory that there's ruby in Antarctica. But
so with enough global warming,
we could find rubies in Antarctica.
Once you get under all the ice cap.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of how rubies formed. Ruby mining is pretty much open pit mining. They kind of scrape off a layer of dirt and kind of sift through that, put it through a little jig thing and shake it out. It's heavy. Oh, we could talk about that.
Yeah, the specific gravity of ruby is
4. It's 4. So it's really heavy. It's heavier than a lot of your other, like, gravelly rock material. So when they're mining it out, they put it through
a jig.
A jig.
Yeah,
they put it through a jig and it kind of shakes. And so all of your ruby material gets trapped in the first 2 or 3 sections of that jig.
Yeah.
And then everything else kind of gets washed out. So when they're sorting what they've processed, they really only have to look in that first 1 or 2
boxes of the jig through the wash plant because it's so heavy that it tends to go to the bottom right in that first part.
So Jonathan, what are the major ruby sources on the market today?
So can't talk about ruby without talking about Burma, which is the oldest and most well-known.
Known as Myanmar today.
Yes, known as Myanmar today. And then with the most material right now that's probably coming out is out of Mozambique, which the Mozambique rubies are really beautiful and amazing. Mm-hmm. And Gemfields is the one that owns most of the
mining
in Mozambique, and then they auction that off as rough to gem dealers.
Mm-hmm.
And
they have these huge gem auctions, and they've really kind of driven the price of ruby up.
Yeah, it's the turning the rough into an auction format has definitely driven the price of ruby up, as well as global demand.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Chinese favor the red color. I mean, that's the color of their flag. That's their favorite.
Color.
So as there's been more Chinese wealth, they've been going after the very best rubies, which, we're in a world market, so that's driven the price of ruby up as well.
We kind of got into the ruby business in another East African company in Madagascar.
Yeah, so in Vatumandre, there was a very big find. It came in the early 2000s, and there was still plenty of production coming out of Burma at that point, and so a lot of the dealers didn't want to get involved in the Madagascar because it was a different color than the Burmese goods.
It was kind of like darker.
It was a little bit deeper red and a little bit more, but we found that color to be quite popular in the U.S., and so we were able to come into the U.S. market with quite a large amount of Madagascar ruby. None of it was huge. I mean, the largest ones I think were 4 or 5 carats were the largest that came out of that find that were clean.
And we got into it right when the Lantos Act kind of banned Burmese ruby.
A little bit before, but not a lot before. And so that really put us in a very strong position in ruby
in the U.S.
for a good 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Before they lifted the ban.
Yeah. And we ran out of ruby.
And we ran out of
Madagascar ruby because the mine kind of dried up, and so we ran out of supply. So now all we have left is like 4 millimeter and smaller, except for that one 477.
Yeah.
We have a 477 left.
I think that when we talk about ruby and kind of valuing a ruby, it's important to kind of talk about it compared to diamonds almost, because most people know how to value a diamond, right? The 4 C's: carat, clarity, color, and cut. But when it comes to valuing a ruby, the 4 C's are kind of out the window. The most important thing in a colored gemstone, when you value a colored gemstone, is the color.
Yeah, and color is far and away more important than the rest of the 4 C's, whereas in diamond, they're more equally distributed. Between them, they're valued more equally, whereas color is definitely the most important. Now, that's not saying that if the clarity is horrible and the color is good, it still doesn't carry nearly as much value as when the clarity is good and the color is good.
Yeah.
There's definitely a difference there, and same with carat and how big it is, and all that makes a difference, but definitely color is king.
But inclusions are okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd be really hard-pressed to find a ruby that didn't have an inclusion in it.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that as we're talking about, valuing a ruby, we should also talk about treatment a little bit too. Is that the 90% of all ruby is heat treated, and the heat treatment has more to do with clarity than anything else. Is that you're adjusting, you're breaking down some of those crystals that are trapped inside the stone.
Right. So rubies are typically filled with what's called rutile needles, which are also what give it the chatoyancy to make the star.
Yeah.
And when you have not heat treated a ruby, the crystals are all intact in these beautiful kind of lattice formations. But the minute you heat treat a ruby, it breaks up those needles. So when you look at it under a microscope, you can see little sections and kind of the plot, or
almost like dotted lines.
Yeah, dotted lines of what the lattice used to look like.
Yeah, and so that's a common treatment. It's a standard treatment, and it's opened it up to have a lot more beautiful rubies in the world than we would without them. So there's nothing wrong with treatment. It's all about disclosure.
They've been heat treating rubies for
hundreds of years. Yeah, it's the old style technique. I think the Sri Lankans started heat treatment way back when.
Way back, blowing like fire like through a little pipe, blowing and like turning it. It's pretty cool. You can Google heat treatment, like old heat treatments, and see pictures of how they used to do it. But one thing I wanted to mention too on inclusions is that sometimes inclusions in gemstones are super beautiful. And if you want to see some really cool inclusions or photographs of inclusions up close, you can check out our friend Nathan Renfro. He works for GIA, but he also has an Instagram page. You can find him at Micro World of Gems, and you can see different inclusions in gemstones. And he has some really cool ones of rubies.
Yeah. Rubies definitely have some really beautiful inclusions as well as all colored gemstones. But yeah, he does a beautiful job of photographing them.
The one thing you do want to be careful about with inclusions is, yeah, they're okay to have in a ruby, but you don't want any fractures reaching the surface of the gem, because that can lead to durability issues.
Yeah, one solid hit to you can snap the ruby in two.
Yeah.
So that's something to definitely watch for if you're out buying ruby, is you don't want anything that breaks the surface.
Another treatment that you kind of need to keep your eye out for is if you do have a lot of those surface reaching fractures, they'll go in, and it's called glass filled rubies.
Right.
And so they'll put it's a glass filler. Think about when you fix a crack on your windshield and you kind of go in and you put that material in there that solidifies the crack and makes it so it won't crack anymore. They've been doing that a lot with the material from Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Yep, a lot from there as well as a lot from Mogok.
Oh.
Actually, more from Mongshu. I'm sorry, from Mongshu.
Yeah, in Burma.
Yeah,
or in Myanmar.
Burma. Yeah, in Myanmar. More of the Mongshus do a lot of that. The other. Then there's one more. There's one more treatment that's also out there on the market, and it turns the rubies almost like a cinnamon color.
Yeah, they have a little orange, orange undertone. Orange,
and that's when they do lattice diffusion, and that's under super high heat, and that can turn gem ruby material or corundum material that normally wouldn't be red, and it turns it more of a cinnamony color.
They add boron?
Yeah, I think it's boron.
They add boron to it when they heat it. And it kind of, the gemstone, I guess, would soak it up, but only a thin layer on the surface. So if you go to recut that gemstone or anything else, the color is going to be different under that top layer. I think it's also important to talk about the ruby market and where the prices of ruby are kind of at. The demand for ruby has increased greatly over the last, I would say, 5 years.
Yeah.
And there was, I think the most expensive ruby was sold 2 years ago for like $32 million. It was a 25 karat stone.
Wow.
Yeah. That's
expensive
crazy for ruby. Like that's what you think diamonds should go for. Well,
rubies are a lot more rare than diamonds.
They are more rare.
It only makes sense. There's a lot less of them out there, especially in that kind of size range. Mm-hmm. That's very unusual for rubies to see them in that kind of size.
Right. Anything, I think, over a carat in ruby, and the price goes way up.
Yeah, it's definitely exponential. It's not like 1 + 1 is 2. It's
No.
A 2 carat ruby is like 5 times what a 1 carat is.
Right. Your per carat price goes up, like Jonathan said, 5 times between each carat jump. Our ruby supplier, he kind of has a really cool story.
He has a very cool story, is that his family were the first non-whites that were allowed in the British-controlled Streator mines in Burma back in the late 1800s. Mm-hmm. And so his family goes way back in the ruby and sapphire business, and his mother would tell us stories of how she used to play in the garden with ruby crystals.
The size of marbles. Because they were too small to cut at the time. Yeah.
And that was before treatment got as good as it is now, and so they were probably also included.
Yeah.
But still,
ruby crystals the size of marbles when you're a kid. Yeah. Can you imagine?
And that also shows kind of a neat thing that you get to know these families in the gem business and how far back these families get connected and have been in the industry is really an interesting part of the industry. And one of the reasons that I've loved the industry and came into the industry was due to those relationships.
Yeah, they're some of our best family friends. So we're business partners, but before that, we're friends.
Absolutely. Yeah, even if our business changes from year to year, and sometimes we sell more ruby and sometimes we sell more garnet and sometimes
we sell more opal.
But all of our suppliers are friends, and same with our customers. And so that's one of the great things about the jewelry industry is the relationships. Well, I think that wraps up Ruby for today. And so Thank you for listening to another episode of Gem Junkies.
Gem Junkies.
And feel free again to leave us any comments, or if you have any questions, feel free to email us at gemjunkies@parlaygems.com.
And we wanted to give a big thank you to Dallin Burns, who created our intro and exit music. And there's going to be a link for his website on our blog. And we also want to thank Savannah Rose, who does all the editing of our podcast.
Savannah.
Thanks, Savannah. She's in the room with us right now.
Yeah. And also, please, if you're enjoying it, please subscribe and rate us if you like us.
Only if you like us.
Only if you like us.
If you want to see what we're doing and kind of featuring in our business, not just, the gemstone world, but the jewelry world, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Parley Gems. Bye-bye! That is what it means in Sanskrit. Did you know that?
I did not.
Its name in Sanskrit is Rutile, which means King of Gems.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Is it pronounced Sanskrit or Sanskrit?
Sanskrit.
You sure? I think it's Sanskrit.
Sanskrit.
Do you want to do that again?
Yeah.
So you don't talk about skirts. People are gonna be like, "What are Sanskirts?"
Okay.
So confused.
Let's go back to Ruby.
Ruby, the king of all gemstones.
Yeah.